Hello, I am Dr. Thomas Woolley, and I'm here to tell you about some of the features that go on behind the Covid-19 intervention simulator that we have constructed to help you understand how an infection will travel through an educational setting. On the left here, we have all the panels that can be clicked as a drop-down, and the first one you see is the information panel. This panel gives you an idea of what goes on inside the calculator, and although it's a pretty good brief, we do recommend that you see the reference text. If you click on it, it will take you to our preprint paper, so it hasn't been reviewed yet, but it was written by these authors here. Joshua Moore is also the person who encoded the intervention simulator. But the basic idea of the simulator is it works on a modular structure of this circular day structure. So at the start of every day, anyone who isn't isolating can come to their school during the recovery period, and if testing is occurring, they will be tested at the start of the day. The idea is you want to test people at the start so they don't then go on to mix if they are infected. But as we will see later, we can turn testing on and off on specific days. Once everyone has been tested, if they are found to be infectious, they are taken away and isolated. If not, they'll then sent to their classrooms where infections can happen. Now, there are two different types of infection, again, modular structure, so we can turn each on and off. But there are the infections that come from the agents themselves, mixing the students, and then there are infections coming from the outside of the school. Finally, during the day, if someone gets infected, then after 3 days of infection, they can start to become symptomatic. If a person becomes symptomatic, they can choose themselves to isolate regardless of whatever a test says. So, highly complicated, lots of inputs and outputs, and that's what this video is all about. We will be going through all of the inputs, and I'll also give you an example of what the outputs tell you in terms of the information. The first set of parameters we have are pretty self-explanatory, but if you ever need any help, you can click on the I button at the side, and it will give you a little bit more information of what they do. So the first one is the total number of agents. This is all of the people in your simulation. So if we were simulating a class, 30 people would seem to be an approximate number for a number of students in a class. But if we were simulating an entire school, we may want to bump this up to 300. But for now, let's keep it at around 30. The next is the subgroup size, and this is one of the key features of the simulator. The idea is that we were looking at what would happen with local contacts and non-local contacts. The idea of people in a small bubble versus those outside of that bubble. So the subgroup represents all of the contacts of a person that are local to them. In terms of a school, you might think this to be their table size. So in a class of 30, you would have 5 people on a table. But if we were using a school, say 300 people in a school, then you may want to say, well, it's roughly 30 people to a class in the school. But again, let's stick with the class size of 30. We can change the subgroup size to anywhere between 1 and 30, but it always has to be a divisor. So for 30, I could use 1, 5, 6, 10, 12, etc. And the subgroup size are all those people who will become isolated as well as the person who is infected. So if I were to set this at 1 and a person became highlighted as infectious through a test, then only that single person would become isolated. However, if I put it up to 10, then 10 people would isolate as well as that single person who got a positive test. If I put it up to 30, then this is a firebreak scenario that if a single person in your class becomes has a positive test, then you say the entire class must isolate. But again, let's put it down to about 5, which is the idea of a table group. Everyone on that table would isolate if any person on that table had a positive test. Background prevalence. This is exactly what it says. It's the idea of how much COVID-19 is in the environment outside of the school. So this slider links with this toggle here, include infections from wider population. If you turn it on, then every day you have a chance of gaining new infections from outside of the school. If this is turned off, then the only chance is initiating the simulation. So the background prevalence initiates how many people are set with infections in the school setting. The R number is the basic reproduction number. This tells us on average how many secondary infections we would expect to generate from an infected person. And again, we can set it to whatever we like. Above 1 means the infection should be growing, below 1 the infection should be burning itself out. Probability of symptomatic infections. This is very important because as we're thinking about educational settings, quite often children don't show symptoms of being infected. So we can say, even if you are infected, what's the probability that you don't show an infection? If it's a 100%, then you will definitely show a symptom. If it's 0, then you won't show any symptoms. And so you won't isolate just on your own intuition of how you're feeling. Percentage of immune agents, we've just added this in. The idea is this will cover anyone who's already had COVID, anyone who's double vaccinated, and it tells you how many of your class will be thought to be immune. So they no matter what, they will never be able to get it. So 10% of 30, that would be 3 people. Of course, if you don't know the data, there's a lot of slides here and you may not know the exact value of any of them. You can use current confirmed cases in Wales. This goes to the Gov website and pulls the information directly from there. It'll fit the background prevalence and R number for you. But all of the rest of the parameters you have to fit. The next set of parameters are all about the interventions. So we've set the infection simulation up. It will tear through the class, but what we want to try and do is stop that. So we add a number of interventions, non-pharmaceutical interventions, that will help us understand how we can stop the infection spread. The first one is the probability of false negatives, and the second one is the probability of false positives. So for any test you have for COVID, they will have these 2 probabilities. Firstly, the false negatives is the idea that if you take a test and you are infectious, this is the probability that you will not be picked up. The second one, probability of false positive, is the idea that if you take a test but you're healthy, this is the probability that you will be highlighted as having COVID. Now, thankfully, most of the tests that are out there have very small false positives, but they still do occur, and we've taken this number from the literature of 0.3%. So 0.3% of the time, if you take a test but you're completely healthy, it will say that you have COVID. Probability of agent compliance. Now, this is quite important because it's this idea that even if I do get a positive test, do I isolate? Currently, we've set it at 100% because we have the idea of in an educational setting, the teachers are the gatekeepers to the classroom, so they will be able to see the test results. And if at any point they see a positive test, they will send that child home. But external to schools, this may not be 100%. If someone gets a positive test, but they really can't take a day off school or work for whatever reason, they may choose to ignore their test result and come to whatever place of work or education that they choose. So we definitely do not recommend you do this, but it's nice to understand what is the effect of this compliance parameter on the simulations. The last 3 toggle buttons are hopefully fairly explanatory. We have isolate agents displaying symptoms. The idea is if you turn this off, then even if they do get a positive test, a person wouldn't isolate. So we hopefully do want that on. Then the second 2 are interventions. We're looking at ventilation and mask usage. If you have a well-ventilated environment, this will blow any viral load out of the air and then just reduce the spread of the virus. And if agents are wearing masks, again, it will stop the virus spreading. So you can add these 2 in to see how they influence the situation you're dealing with. How they affect the R number is all in the paper. So if you want more information, please do check the research. Finally, we have mixing and testing days. So the mixing days are when all the people in our population are able to mix. Currently it's set to weekdays, Monday to Friday, because we're thinking about a school environment. But if you want to also think about groups getting together outside of school, you may want to put Sunday and Saturday in as well. Testing days, these are the days that tests will be given. We've just put Monday and Friday, but you could do every single day, or you could just say on a single Monday. Every Monday you test all your students, depending on how many tests you have and what your capacity for testing is. The slide here, number of weeks, tells you how long you're going to use the simulation for. We currently set it for 4 weeks or about a month. You can set it up to 13 weeks, but we would suggest that the longer the simulation, the less accurate it will be, because a lot of your parameters will be changing over that time, but during any simulation that you run, the parameters will be fixed. Finally, the toggle here, delay testing until an agent displays symptoms. That means that we don't start testing, even if we set the full week of testing up, our testing will not occur until that first person is discovered to show a COVID-19 positive response. So even though we can test every day, we don't until we find that first infected person. However, if we turn that off, then Monday to Friday, we test every Monday to Friday. If we turn it on, we only test every day when we find that first person. Finally, simulation control. This will actually, once you set up your parameters, run the simulation. You can give the simulation a name. So if you were running multiple simulations, you could remind yourself of what you did. So this could be the high R case that you run, and that will give it a name. You can reset the entire simulation back to its default values. And once you've run a number, you can export them. This will export an Excel file with different pages having all the different simulations that you've run. And once you've set the simulation up, so hi R, you can press start and it will run and update the graphs on the right. We have 4 graphs. Top left is the total mean infections. This tells you how it's a cumulative response of how many in my class, how many people have got infected. The bold line is the mean value. The shading around it shows you the standard error, 95% confidence interval. Top right is the mean active infections. This is the number of infections active at a specific day. Bottom left is the number of isolations. They're the active isolations. So again, it's that slice in time, how many people are isolating at this point. Then the bottom right is a total mean number of absent days and total mean number of infections. So this was a metric that we used to understand the educational environment, the idea of how many infections are we getting versus how many absent days, because we want to reduce both of those. It's no good having lots of people infected if they're missing lots of school. So we want to reduce both of those values. All the little dots there show you all the simulations. So this calculator will run 500 stochastic probabilistic simulations. And these 500 simulations show you the spread. That X in the middle there, that shows you the mean value of all of these simulations. Now, these graphs are in percentages, but this summary table down below, that gives you the numbers in exact quantity. So mean total number of infections here is 5.19. So that tells you, on average, you'd expect 5 people to be infected in this kind of setup. Mean total recoveries, percentage of total outbreaks. Now, what this tells us is that 0.8% of the time, the entire class becomes infected. So it's a very small chance that the entire class becomes infected, but that's what that represents. The total outbreak is the probability that the entire class becomes infected. And then mean absence infection ratio is the ratio of what that you're seeing in this bottom right graph here. If you run multiple simulations, so this could be low R, low R. So let me infection parameter, and now let me change R to be a bit lower. I run again. It will update the simulations and it will give you the exact simulation that you've run. That's what this square on the right here is saying. That's what you're seeing. But if I wanted to compare the high R and low R case, I could plot both sets and it will tell you exactly how they compare. And again, if I export the results, all of that information will be given to you in an Excel spreadsheet over different pages. In the next video, we'll be going over a couple of case studies to show you exactly how to use the simulator in an exact type of case.